The Seven Principles by Ohashu Hara. Published 1911. The word theosophy literally means divine knowledge or wisdom, the wisdom of the gods, a term many thousands of years old. Theosophy is usually supposed to have first seen light about the 3rd century, but it is really a great deal older, and, according to one authority, is supposed to have originated through an Egyptian priest, one Potamu by name, in the days of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Theosophy inculcates belief in one supreme deity, as indeed do most forms of religion. It also believes that the soul of man is itself immortal, and, being a part of soul of the universe, is of necessity of the same substance with it. Then again, we come to the mystic and magical side of theosophical teachings, and find here the same ideas which prompt men to become yogis, or Sufis, or any other kind of adept, the idea that by becoming pure and overcoming desire, they can read the divine secrets and mysteries, and even come into contact with divine beings. Such was Bulwerito's mythical Zeroi, such indeed have been the adepts through all ages. The law of the eternal is that of evolution, for man as spirit passes from the lowest to the highest, literally unfolding from plane to plane, from lower to higher consciousness, and from that to still more exalted states, until he attains perfection and is reabsorbed in the divine love, the infinite. The infinite is unity, and as unity means one, the infinite stands for one. All worlds are formed from one substance, and in that substance is contained all universal elements, as all numbers are contained in the unity, one. The unity or God, the universal substance from which all other substances are born, is like a great central sun, towards which all other suns and their systems turn in a spiral. Human souls are like separate suns or fires, they are distinct from the universal fire, or substances which permeates infinity, interpenetrating everything in the universe, yet joined to it and ever moving towards it. These souls are guided by a purifying process from one experience to another, from one incarnation to another, and the life of man is really an effort, often puny and futile, but still a distinctive effort to show forth on earth at least some of the glory and divine effulgence of the beauty and truth which permeate the universe and constitute its harmony. The education of the soul is a slow and painful process, just as the earth was born in travail, or a woman gives birth to a child, so is the same purified, born in the spiritual, and reborn in the material world, amidst sufferings, pain, sorrow and upheavals. Through such experiences man gradually becomes freed from the gross and material, his soul becomes drawn nearer and nearer to the spiritual center of all, but, like a silver streak running through each life, is the divine fire centered in every heart veiled by the flesh, unknown, often unrecognized. God dwells within each individual soul, guides it, protects it, advises it, and finally draws it back to the center. Imagine a huge maypole from which, instead of ribbons, proceeds shafts of light. Each shaft finds its center in the heart of an individual, and moving as the individual moves, is yet never separated from the pole, from which the light proceeds. The body is the instrument of the soul. The soul, as I have described, is linked to the eternal substance, God. It is one with the unity. When man dies, the soul draws around it a new body, and with each new envelope the divine spark becomes more and more in evidence. It is essential to understand how theosophy looks upon man as an individual before we go any further in the philosophy. The physical body, which scientists and others generally regard as the man, is but the envelope, the dress of gross material which encases the real being. So that theosophy regards the interior or spiritual man as the real man, and the body merely as an instrument of expression, by means of which the spiritual man becomes manifest. It is, in fact, a medium which enables the spiritual forces and essences to play and interplay in such a manner that a definite and self-centered individual is evolved from the mode, or spiritual atom. To the gross materialist this idea may be assimilated with difficulty, but it is really not so very difficult after all. There is the flesh body, composed of bones and sinews, of flesh and blood. It lives and breathes and has its being at the instance of some force over which it has no control. At death that force is removed, and the hitherto animated flesh lies still and cold. So with a lamp of oil, the vessel containing the oil is dull and cold, the oil itself has no life, but light a match and place it to the wick, and poof! Your lamp is alive, alight, a living dancing flame. Again, a breath of wind and your lamp is out again, dead for the time being, yet can it be relighted once again? The number 7 has always been associated with occult tatters from very early days, and it certainly plays a considerable part in these teachings. There are the 7 principles, the 7 planes of existence, 7 races, 7 Buddhas, and so forth. In this chapter, however, I will consider the 7 principles first, because by understanding them properly we have a much clearer insight into the nature of man and the reason why he goes through the various phases of evolution, which are necessary to his salvation and ultimate absorption in nirvana, or the return to spirit, which is the aim and object of his existence here on earth, and of the many incarnations through which he passes as he endeavors to learn the lesson of his being. These 7 principles may be looked upon as 7 bodies, which go to express the composite unity we know as man. These bodies are not like shells or envelopes as one might imagine, but blend and merge into one another as might the tints of a watercolor, minting, which, although of one color apparently, is yet composed of several washes of different tints, which, though unlike, are absolutely blended and one. This sounds a little complicated, but I am anxious that you should get this idea clearly focused, because you cannot possibly have a truthful conception of these principles unless you can realize what I mean. These 7 principles are again divided into a higher and a lower state of being. Of the higher state we are taught to consider 3 bodies or principles, of the lower state there are 4. Again, there is no hard and fast line of demarcation between the higher and lower principles, they are all interwoven, like the web and the woof of a piece of tapestry. The higher cannot manifest without the lower can exist only for a very limited time without the higher. But in the living breathing body of man they are blended according to the state of his spiritual evolution. In the lower stages of existence the lower principles are strongest, and become more manifest than the fag. Indeed, in some forms of life, even human life, the higher principles are so remote it is not at all easy to understand or believe in their presence at all. Although the wise know that they exist just the same, even if such existence is not easily apparent, we will take the 4 lower principles first. They are divided as follows. First, we have the natural man, that is to say, the physical, material body, which unthinking people invariably regard as the real man. Secondly, we get the life principle, or the vital part of man, his breath, called pra by Eastern philosophers. Thirdly, there is the astral body. Fourthly, the principle of desire, the passions and desires which draw man back to earth from the dwelling of the gods, and which is responsible for his sins and downfalls, the animal man. In fact, passing to the side of the higher and more spiritual attributes, we come first of all to the mind, or intellectual man, which forms the first principle of the spiritual triad. This is that attribute which constitutes the real man, the real ego that incarnates from one earth life to another. Next we get the spiritual soul, or the second spiritual principle. And thirdly, the pure spirit, the ego. To take these vehicles in the order in which I have written them, it is easy to understand that the material body exists as a medium to contain and express all the other principles during the earth life. The natural and spiritual man are so interwoven and co-associated the one with the other, that while the natural or physical man is a temporary manifestation of the spiritual principle, the spiritual principle in its turn is a permanent form of realizatio of the natural attributes we call the man. Always remember that in life there is no actual division, although in death, when certain of the physical and lower principles are shed, as a snake height shed its skin, the higher principles retiring to the dwelling of the gods, of which more later on, until they are ready to take on a new skin, a truly wonderful process. Spirit cannot express itself in form without seeking material deposits with which to form a garment clothe itself, and this garment, which we know as the natural man, is necessary to the development and education of the ego. Without it there could be no experience gained, no battles fought and won, and, as in all things that exist, the subjective or invisible, and the objective or visible, are so closely linked that they cannot be the one without the other, in the lower phases of expressio at any rate. The life principle is literally the breath that enters our lungs at the moment of birth, and which forsakes them at the moment of death. Without breath, no life. At the close of life, when the higher principles pass to the state of bliss in order to rest from the toil of this earth life, and assimilate the lessons they have learned whilst here, the breath passes away, and instantly of it, nothing remains at all. It is not like the physical or natural body which takes a certain time to decay, nor like the astral body which fades as the physical decays. Nor like the desire or animal soul, which can be drawn back to earth through mediumship. In fact, it is the most wonderful of things, poof. A breath and man lives. Again a breath, and he is dead. Without it the body cannot live, but it is not necessary in any way to the three higher principles which exist without the body. The third form, which is one probably as familiar, at any rate in theory, with many of us as the natural body, is the ethereal double of the man which is known as the astral body or principle. Even people who are quite ignorant of occultism and metaphysics talk glibly about astrals, and even of traveling in the astral, which of course they do when they dream during sleep. This astral double is a counterpart of the physical man, only like a ghost it is made of ethereal essence which is intangible, and, though not by any means always invisible, is still not often seen, except in cases of so-called thought transference, and the sudden appearances of some form of spiritual manifestation of the nature and exact appearance of the deceased person, so frequently seen by those near and dear to him, even at a distance of many thousands of miles. Such instances are too numerous to be doubted even by the skeptical. Cases occur every day. Some people ascribe it to a telepathic communication between the brain of the dying person and that of the living. Some ascribe it to a spirit, some few call it pure imagination, or something they cannot understand, but the theosophist and those who understand the true laws of the occult know that it is the projection of the astral body which passes through space to the scenes to which it is drawn by desire or love. It is possible also, in life, during the sound sleep of the physical body, to send the astral double traveling through the planes of space, or indeed upon the earth plane. On the astral plane, as it is called, this etheric double gains experience, encounters often also some of the strange and terrible denizens of those realms. Better still, it can help and assist those dear ones or others who are in trouble or danger, leading them to safety and protecting them from the most extraordinary perils. Somewhere Mrs. Bissett has written some most interesting accounts of such instances, but I forget the exact text and descriptions. Enough it is that we can learn through our astral, if we desire to do so, much that might be otherwise difficult. The physical and earthly body is visible and tangible. The astral body cannot be seen excepting by clairvoyant eyes which have the power to perceive the delicate vibrations of the astral form. It often happens that the astral body is not of the same sex as the physical body, and then we have that phenomena so frequently seen of the womanly man and the manly woman. In such instances the polarization of the sex magnetism is uneven, and creates the contradictory conditions which so frequently make these people who are thus afflicted more or less scorned by their fellows. No man likes a manly woman, and women despise womanly men. The fourth principle is the seat of our passions and desires, the animal soul of man. Theosophists call this Kama-rupa, but I prefer to call it the animal soul because it is so much more simple for the uninitiated. This fourth principle is the seat of desire and passion, of all our objective and subjective thoughts and feelings with regard to material matters and affairs. In some cases it is intensely evil, and it remains, like the astral body, on earth after the parting of the higher principles from the physical body at death for their period of rest in that intermediate state into which every ego enters between one incarnation and the next. This is where the ego resides in the dwelling of the gods, known as Devacha, in a state of blissful rest until again drawn back to the earth life by the unfulfilled karma made in the last existence. Karma, as I will explain later, means the law of retribution. It is in fact the fate we make for ourselves by our thoughts and actions, each of which must bear fruit in a later existence. To return to the animal soul, this remains on earth, a ghostly replica of its former owner, for a period entirely dependent upon the life and habits of the defunct person to whom it was attached. Those who were of a material nature, loving the good things of this life, clinging desperately to their surroundings and to those who were with them here on earth, will not lose this animal soul so rapidly as those who seek for spiritual things. People who die suddenly by accident or murder also cling for a long time to their old haunts, especially if there is any unfinished task or something they wished to complete but were prevented from so doing by the sudden parting of the spirit. But when the individual has lived a pure existence, or even an ordinary life, without any special demonstration of good or evil principles, this animal soul melts as the mist disappears before the morning sun. But when he has lived badly, and his desires have been towards sin rather than the things which are normal, then will the animal soul turn back and haunt the scenes of life. In the case of a very evil and material personality, it may remain for quite a long time on earth before becoming finally dispensed and disintegrated, sometimes, indeed, for many hundreds of years, when it will haunt the scenes of its desires, such as buried treasures, the place where it met a violent death, slaughterhouses, battlefields, or wherever the stench of blood is found, or the haunts of evil or debauched men and women. Wherever evil abounds and good is not, this state is specially prolonged when the animal soul is used for the purposes of a medium, such purposes serving to continually draw it back to its former state. More than this, for it actually exists, vampire-like, upon those bodies it is thus enabled to inhabit. The animal soul under such circumstances frequently becomes a very evil and mischievous entity, and ultimately forms one of those objects of the lower world with which all occultists are familiar. I allude, of course, to elementaries, the most mischievous and harmful denizens of the unseen. Occultists teach that where the four elements, earth, air, fire and water, prevail, there will be found certain corresponding spheres governed by angels of the planets, and these angels bear name according to the substance over which they rule, and the elementals which obey their dictates. It is taught that under each of these exalted intelligences there are 7 orders, and under them, yet again another 7, and so on ad infinitum through cosmos into chaos. The elementals simply swarm in the element they represent, and they attend each individual according to their office and strength in that individual's psychic composition. For a man or woman is spiritual or material not so much according to the standard of morals, as to the standard of the soul. When these elementals are in a peaceful frame of mind they do very little harm, or indeed none, and often good. When they are disturbed, however, and in a malevolent frame of mind, they are like swiftly moving flames or atoms swishing through their element under immense dynamic pressure, These infuriated elementals, when they come into contact with human beings, work havoc with their victims, causing disease, disaster, and all kinds of trouble. These spirits of the subhuman kingdom are governed by natural law and also by human will. They can be controlled by their superiors, yet even there under certain conditions they can work mischief and harm. These elementaries are imperfect and usually vicious humans. They can take on flesh but only in animal form. They people thickly certain planes of the unseen astral spheres. They are preserved in the astral fluid, as we might preserve a severed finger in methylated spirit. They are not the elementals of which I have spoken, the denizens of the four elements, air, earth, fire and water, but they are, so to say, the servants of these elementals. The magician can and does evoke them at will, the medium uses and is used by them, yet they are evil and mischievous, and in these forms can live through the medium, and become positively dangerous in a purely physical sense. In some cases also it will prey upon the eususpectic medium, sapping his vitality, acting as a vampire, until, pale and wan, he is neither dead nor yet truly alive, owing to the unfortunate alliance with this spirit, which is yet no spirit, but just an evil force, a thing which could not exist of itself, and which is one day doomed to utter extinction. This animal soul possesses also a certain amount of active intelligence, and may gain for itself a spurious reputation for knowledge which it does not possess. These things, as I have already said, frequent evil places, and there is an atmosphere peculiarly happy to them. They will sometimes seize upon some weak debauch, making him or her an instrument for the attainment of its own evil desires. So it happens that weak men, weak so far as character goes and moral strength, may become possessed of almost demoniacal attributes when under the influence of drink, and one of these wandering animal souls. At each a time the incentive to lust, to murder even, is given by the creature with which he is obsessed. He runs amok, and tragedy follows upon what to begin with was merely a drunken spree. From this, it is easily apparent that the danger of obsession by these wandering elementals is not only to those who become mediumistic, but that they are equally liable to prey upon those who are merely weak and foolish, without being occult, and under favorable conditions convert a man, who, under normal conditions, would be kind, gentle and harmless, into a demo of lust and passion. Of course everybody is not open to such forms of obsession. It is only the very weak and sensual individual who can thus become a slave. The man or woman who leads a wholesome, God-fearing existence will suffer no such terrors to come near them. I am sometimes inclined to think that one form of nerve weakness I frequently encounter in my practice, those people, usually women, who, by a constant and very persistent course of autosuggestion, delude themselves into the belief that an evil-minded person is hypnotizing them, and so forcing them to do things, and suffer experiences which are quite unnecessary, may be, after all, obsession by some such soul form. Nor do I think there is very much doubt but that madmen and lunatics generally are dominated by some similar force. This deals so much with the unpleasant side of the unseen world, that some of my readers may be inclined to think too much of the subject. I strongly advise them not to do so. Some things are best left unconsidered. Be just content to take it for granted and then leave it. To you no such experiences need come, and you do not want to invite the possibility by allowing your mind to dwell upon the thought. I will now pass over to the higher soul trinity, which, grouped together as one entity, will pass thus to that state of bliss, the dwelling of the gods, of which I have already spoken. It is only in cases of the greatest wickedness this procedure is deviated from, but when a man has been irreclaimably wicked through several incarnations, he is barred this period of rest endeavour enjoyed by the ordinary ego. In such a case the personal soul, or the mind-body, which is the real man, the individual incarnating from one time to another, is absolutely annihilated. He becomes as nothing, dissolves into space, loses all the knowledge gained in former sojourns upon the earth plane, all the experiences thus gained become as nothing. The spiritual soul cannot be touched, however, it simply loses the state of evolution which it had attained, the period of rest it should have enjoyed, and starts all over again, after a very short period as a planetary spirit, however, to return to the mind-soul, which forms the first of the higher group of principles. This is really the intellectual faculty which raises man above the level of the animal, which enables him to distinguish between right and wrong, to plan, judge, originate and execute his ideas, to realize the existence of spirit, and to aspire to higher things. This mind-soul is really the power of thought, for which mental scientists claim all power. When they say that all knowledge lies within us, they speak correctly only in part. The knowledge of past conditions certainly lies there, sometimes dormant, sometimes active, but all knowledge does not lie there, or our object in reincarnating would be lost. When we have gained all knowledge of things, temporal and spiritual, we shall no longer need to incarnate, but will become absorbed in nirvana. All the knowledge, consciously and unconsciously gained in previous incarnations, is most certainly with us, but that must not be confused with the absolute wisdom which brings conscious knowledge with it, which is erroneously claimed as a product of thought by scientists. This mind-man is, then, the real man, just embodied consciousness, the man who endures through all time, acquiring experience, assimilating the knowledge gained, drawing the higher principles back to earth again when the previous earth experience has been digested, and the time has come for a new body to be taken on, and fresh knowledge attained. In The Key to Theosophy, Madame Blavatsky describes this mind-soul in the following words: try to imagine a spirit, a celestial being, whether we call it by one name or another, divine in its essential nature, yet not pure enough to be one with the all, and having, in order to achieve this, to so purify its nature as finally to gain that goal. It can only do so by passing individually and for smally, i.e. spiritually and physically, through every experience and feeling that exists in the manifold or differentiated universe. It has, therefore, after having gained such experience in the lower kingdoms, and having ascended higher and still higher with every rung on the ladder of being, to pass through every experience on the human planes. In its very essence it is thought, and is therefore called in its plurality, Masaputra, the sons of universal mind / this individualized thought is what we theosophists call the room / human ego, the thinking entity imprisoned in a case of flesh and bones. Theosophically, then, it stands for the higher Cesiet principle in man, the permanent incarnating individual. In Theosophy proper, this mind-soul or ego, is given so many names, that much unnecessary doubt arises in the mind of the student, as to what it really consists of. But if he will bear in mind the simple English names and definitions I give here in this book, there is no need for any confusion at all. Bear in mind simply that it is the ego, the individual, the part that does not die, that, whether it is called Manas or Masaputra, or any other special name, it is all one thing, and just simply the mind-soul, the ego, one principle, not a dozen, and one ego, not 4 or 5 different mind forms, or egos, as might quite easily be supposed after a brief study of almost any book upon the subject. Next in order comes the spiritual soul of man, which, in turn, forms the vehicle for the presence of the divine soul, known as Atma in Theosophy. This spiritual soul is closely connected with the mind-soul, and is absolutely the link which connects the latter with Atma or the divine soul. Atma, the divine soul, which is the 7th and last principle, does not dwell actually in the material body. We are taught rather that it sheds a radiance upon the other principles, running through them like a streak of living light. From this it is easily seen that the 6 principles exist dependent upon the holy and vivifying radiance of the soul divine, which soul or principle is above and beyond man, mental and spiritual man, I should say, rather than physical, since the spiritual soul becomes the medium through which the divine principle is manifested. It has been likened to a thread of silver, vivifying and joining the divine and mental principles, running through them as a string may run through a necklace of beads. Indeed, this simile is not an unhappy one, since the string, like the divine principle, is a part of the beads in a way, yet all the time it is of itself entirely individual, and depends not upon the beads at all, although they depend entirely upon it for their unity. This synopsis of the 7 principles of man, to which I shall have occasion to refer frequently from time to time, although brief, is still sufficiently well defined to give the student a clear idea of the subject for working purposes. Of course, this theory of the 7 principles is not confined to theosophical teachings, but is shared by the Philosophers, Quabbalists, and Rosicrucians, out of many other occult philosophies. If you will remember that the physical body, the life principle or breath, and the astral body, all vanish at death, that the desire form lingers according to the links and chains which bind it to earth, but that it is still like the 3 higher principles or state of consciousness, and that the real Mao, the part which endures from incarnation to incarnation, is the mind or the mind principle, I think you will have the whole thing clearly defined and understandable. Other occult teachings, such as the Rosicrucian, contend that the divine principle is enshrined in the heart, and actually dwells within the physical body. Theosophy, however, teaches that it falls upon man as the sunshine falls upon the earth, saturating the viol, but not actually dwelling within. I hope I have made this clear. It is a difficult subject to present, especially when it is necessary to disentangle the true meanings from the maze of Sanskrit terminology, which enfolds all theosophical teachings and records. Of course, this number of 7 is potent throughout the universe. We have the 7 planets, for instance, of the ancients, before Uranus and Neptune were discovered. But in any case, the 7-fold planetary correspondence of the 7-fold principles of man is at least remarkable. The planet Saturn corresponds to the physical body, the Sun to the vital principle, the Moon to the astral body. Mars corresponds to the desire principle, the animal soul. Mercury corresponds to the intellectual principle, Jupiter to the spiritual soul, and Venus to the pure spirit, Atma. Of course, I do not regard these as arbitrary, and it is merely to show how such things in nature are linked together by this sacred and mystic number, that I give this example of planetary correspondence. A man may again come under the 7 divisions, if we consider him as first, the natural man, the reasoning man, the will man, the intellectual man, the heart man, the intentive man, and the spiritual man. This division is, of course, more readily understood than the ordinary 7 principles of theosophy, and yet, in a way, they all stand for the same thing. The heart is the link between the natural, reasoning man, and the spiritual, in the same way that the mind-body is the link between the lower and higher principles. So does Mercury, the messenger of the gods, form the mediator between the planets.